"Sell it," my mother said, staring at the photo of my new house on my phone. "Your brother needs the money more." I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. She was. My father leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You should have discussed this with us before making a decision that affects the whole family." "The whole family?" I asked. "I saved for 6 years, I paid the deposit, the mortgage is in my name." My younger brother, Kyle, stood near the kitchen doorway, silent. Mom grabbed a calculator and started tapping numbers. "If you sell now, you'll make enough to clear Kyle's debts and help him start over." "I'm not selling my house." Her face changed instantly. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the driveway with 2 suitcases while she pointed toward the road. "Don't come back until you fix this." What none of them seemed to understand was that I had already fixed something. For the first time in my life, I had said no. I'm Grace Bennett, 32 years old, and until that afternoon, I had spent most of my adult life believing loyalty meant surrender. My parents constantly reminded me how much they had sacrificed to raise Kyle and me. So I worked overtime, helped with groceries, covered utility bills when money was tight, and never questioned why Kyle's emergencies always became family emergencies while mine remained my responsibility. Buying my first home was the one thing I had done entirely for myself. It wasn't luxurious. It was a modest 2-bedroom house with a small yard, worn kitchen cabinets, and a porch that needed repainting. But when the agent handed me the keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried. I had skipped vacations, taken freelance bookkeeping jobs at night, and kept my old car running long after everyone told me to replace it. I expected my parents to be proud. Instead, my mother demanded control. My father called me selfish. Kyle watched them throw me out without saying a word. I drove to my new house with my belongings in the back seat and slept on the floor because my furniture had not arrived yet. For 3 days, I heard nothing. Then my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, his voice was low and shaken. "Grace," he said, "we need you to come home immediately." My father called 4 more times before noon. I let every call go to voicemail. The first message lasted 11 seconds. "Grace, call me back. There's been a misunderstanding." No apology. No mention of the suitcases on the lawn. No acknowledgement that Mom had told me never to return. The second voicemail was sharper. "We're still your parents. Ignoring us is disrespectful." I stood in the middle of my new kitchen, surrounded by unopened boxes, and deleted it. For 6 years, I had organized my entire life around that house. I worked late during payroll deadlines, then spent evenings handling bookkeeping for 2 small businesses. I skipped beach trips with friends, repaired my old car whenever another warning light appeared, and packed lunch every day instead of buying it. Even while saving, I still sent Mom money for groceries and covered my parents' electric bill whenever Dad said things were tight. Kyle never lived that way. He traded cars twice in 3 years, booked vacations he could not afford, and bought expensive electronics on credit. Every time the bills caught up with him, Mom called it bad luck. Whenever I struggled, she called it poor planning. As I unpacked a box of dishes, old conversations replayed in my head. Mom once laughed and said, "Everything in this family belongs to everyone." Dad had asked more than once, "You'd let Kyle stay with you when you buy a place, right?" I had always answered, "Of course," assuming he meant temporarily. Now I wondered whether those questions had ever been casual. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't my father. It was my cousin Emily. Her message contained only one sentence. "You need to see what everyone's saying." A second message arrived before I could respond. "They think Kyle is getting your house." I stared at the screen. Why were my relatives discussing the home I had bought as though it already belonged to someone else? By Saturday afternoon, I was pulling into my Aunt Linda's driveway for our monthly family gathering. I almost turned around, but Emily had insisted. "You need to hear this yourself," she had said over the phone. "If I explain it, you won't believe me." The moment I stepped through the front door, conversation slowed. Then my uncle smiled. "There she is. Congratulations, Kyle. Looks like your sister finally came around." I frowned. Came around to what? Before anyone answered, another aunt hugged Kyle. "You're going to love that neighborhood. It's such a great place to start over." Kyle forced a weak smile, but kept looking at the floor. I walked over to him. "What are they talking about?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. It's complicated." Before he could say another word, my mother entered the living room carrying a tray of drinks. "There you are," she said cheerfully, as though she hadn't thrown me out of the house 3 days earlier. "Everyone's been asking about the family plan." "The family plan," I repeated. She nodded confidently. "Grace bought the house as an investment. Once she's had time to think logically instead of emotionally, she'll sell it and help Kyle get back on his feet. She's always done the right thing." Several relatives nodded. One of my cousins smiled. "That was incredibly generous of you, Grace." I looked around the room in disbelief. "No," I said clearly, "that isn't happening." The room fell silent. My mother laughed nervously. She doesn't like discussing finances in public. "I'll discuss this," I replied. "I bought that house for myself. I'm not selling it. I'm not transferring it. And nobody besides me owns a single percentage of it." Dad stepped forward. "Grace, you're embarrassing yourself." "No," I answered. "I'm correcting a lie." I opened my folder and removed copies of my closing documents. "This is the deed. This is the mortgage agreement. Every payment came from my account. No one else contributed anything." Aunt Linda adjusted her glasses and examined the paperwork. "So, everything Diane told us was false." Another uncle looked toward my parents. "You said Grace had already agreed." Mom's confident expression disappeared for the first time. Before either of my parents could answer, Emily gently touched my arm. "Come outside," she whispered. "There's something you haven't seen yet." We walked onto the back patio. Emily unlocked her phone, opened a family group chat, and silently handed it to me. The screenshots made my stomach drop. I scrolled through the screenshots slowly. The oldest messages had been sent almost 2 months before I closed on the house. Mom had written first. "Don't worry, Grace has been saving forever. Once she buys it, she'll do what we've always expected." An aunt had replied, "Are you sure she'll agree?" Dad answered before Mom could. "Grace never says no to family. She'll complain at first, but she'll come around. She always does." My hands tightened around Emily's phone. There were more messages. One cousin had asked whether Kyle already had a place to stay. Dad responded, "The house will be Kyle's after Grace sells it. We've already talked about it." That was another lie. No one had talked to me. The next screenshot was even worse. Dad had privately reassured another relative that they could temporarily move into my house once Kyle became the owner because the extra bedroom won't be used anyway. People had made plans around promises my parents had absolutely no right to make. I looked up at Emily. "They planned this before I even got the keys." She nodded. "I know. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because most of us believed you knew. They acted like the decision had already been made between all of you." Inside the house, I could hear relatives raising their voices. Someone was demanding an explanation. Another person asked why everyone had been misled. Word spread through the room faster than either of my parents could stop it. One by one, relatives compared what they had been told. None of the stories matched. Within an hour, my phone began ringing again. Dad. Then Mom. Then Dad again. This time there was no anger. Only panic. "Grace," Mom said in one voicemail, her voice trembling. "People are twisting everything. Please call us." Dad left another. "We need to clear this up before the family starts believing the wrong things. I almost laughed. For years, I had been the one expected to smooth things over. Not anymore. The following morning, I sent one message to both of them. If you want to talk, we'll do it once. Emily will be there, Aunt Linda will be there, and everyone who was told those lies is welcome to come. Dad called immediately. Grace, this doesn't need an audience. It already has one, I replied. The room fell silent. Then I ended the call. The next afternoon, I walked into Aunt Linda's living room where my parents, Kyle, Emily, and several relatives were already waiting. No one spoke. I set my folder on the table, looked directly at my parents, and quietly said, Today, we're going to tell everyone the truth. No one reached for the coffee Aunt Linda had placed on the table. The room was too quiet. My parents sat together on one side. Kyle sat beside them, staring at his hands. Emily sat next to me with her phone. Around us were the relatives who had unknowingly been pulled into a plan that had never belonged to them. I opened my folder. I'll keep this simple. I placed my closing documents in the middle of the table. This is the purchase agreement. This is the mortgage. These are the bank statements showing every deposit, every closing cost, and every payment. Every dollar came from my accounts. Aunt Linda slowly passed the documents around. My uncle looked at my father. So you never paid anything? Dad didn't answer. I continued. For 6 years, I worked overtime. I took freelance bookkeeping jobs at night. I skipped vacations. I drove the same old car because I wanted one thing, a home of my own. Then I looked at Emily. You can show them now. Emily connected her phone to the television. One by one, the screenshots filled the screen. Mom's message. Grace has always done what we ask. Dad's reply. She'll complain, but she'll sell the house once we explain Kyle needs it more. Another message appeared. We can tell everyone it's already part of the family plan. Then another. Kyle will have the house before the end of the year. The room remained silent. My father rubbed his forehead. My mother finally spoke. We were only trying to keep peace in the family. Aunt Linda frowned. Peace? You threw your daughter out because she refused to hand over something she earned herself. Another uncle shook his head. You didn't ask Grace. You made promises using property that wasn't yours. For the first time since this began, Kyle spoke. I need to say something. Everyone turned toward him. I never asked Grace to sell her house. He swallowed hard. I knew Mom and Dad hoped she'd help me, but I never asked them to promise me her home. He looked at me. I should have stopped them when everyone started congratulating me. I didn't because it benefited me. That was wrong. I nodded but said nothing. The apology mattered. It didn't erase what had happened. Dad finally exhaled. We honestly believed Grace would eventually agree. I looked at him calmly. That's the problem. You never thought it was my decision. Neither of my parents argued. There wasn't anything left to say. Over the following weeks, the story spread through the family. The relatives who had once believed my parents without question became far more careful whenever money or favors were involved. No one volunteered to rescue Kyle anymore. No one accepted my parents' version of events without asking questions first. The authority they had relied on for years quietly disappeared. As for me, I made changes that should have happened long ago. I stopped paying their utility bills. I ended every automatic transfer from my bank account. I made it clear that my finances were no longer a family discussion. At my new house, I changed every lock before moving in completely. I installed security cameras, unpacked my furniture, painted the porch myself, and finally bought the dining table I had postponed purchasing for nearly 3 years. The first dinner I hosted wasn't for relatives. It was for the friends who had encouraged me through 6 years of saving. We laughed late into the evening, and for the first time, the house truly felt like home. Months later, my parents asked to meet. They apologized. I believed they regretted what had happened. I also understood something I hadn't understood before. Forgiveness didn't require returning to the same unhealthy relationship. We remained polite. We never returned to the old pattern. Kyle found a smaller apartment he could actually afford and started managing his own finances without expecting me to solve his problems. Looking back, buying my first house changed far more than my address. It showed me that love built on obedience isn't love at all. The key I carried into that little 2-bedroom house didn't just unlock my front door. It unlocked a life where my choices finally belonged to me.